Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third plenary session of this conference. We're looking at the economic drivers of maritime power. My name is Fenella McGerty. I'm Senior Fellow for Defence Economics at the Institute. I was asked to chair this session because of my background in defence spending, investment trends, market outlook, and basically the numbers. So our theme today, the economic drivers of maritime power, I think it's quite a broad topic. So we've looked to try and distill it down into a few questions to try and determine which topics are of the most interest that we can address in this hour and 15 minutes. So ultimately, we would like to consider how the UK can deliver on the ambitions for its maritime sector to contribute to the broader prosperity agenda that we've been talking about today. How can that best be achieved in the context of continuing technological change, other factors such as changing attitudes to climate change, and how might the evolution of the global economy change those responsibilities and tasks that the navies face, and therefore their capability requirements and industrial capability requirements. And finally, how does the UK approach measure up against the global approach to these issues? Not least in terms of the actors in the Indo-Pacific, for instance. Are the drivers the same there as they are here, or are we more focused on those economic and industrial drivers? So I'm delighted to have four speakers here with us today, well, one in person, three virtually, just to talk through some of those themes from their unique perspectives, and we'll then have time for Q&A. Before I go to our first speaker, just a reminder that to our virtual audience, that we will have time for Q&A, but to use the Q&A function, also raise your blue hand, and then I will ask you to actually speak verbally. So again, this session is being recorded, both panelist comments and the Q&A session, and everything is on the record. So to our first speaker now, here with me, it's Sir Simon Bolam, Chief Executive Officer at Defence Equipment and Support. So with extensive acquisition support delivery experience, he's well placed to talk about the efficiency and dynamics, and perhaps the challenges of defence acquisition, but also the national shipbuilding strategy here in the UK, and the maritime sector generally, and how that fits in with the UK prosperity agenda. Thank you, Simon.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Fenella. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much to the First Sea Lord for inviting me to participate, and I very much look forward to what will inevitably be a lively discussion. So I'll start with a few opening comments, if you like, to whet the appetite. And in my position as the Chief Executive of Defence Equipment and Support, my job is really to make the strategy happen in terms of getting the equipment, getting the support to the First Sea Lord to execute the strategy. So let me just start with the opportunity. So in defining the value of a vibrant maritime enterprise to both the delivery of maritime power and UK prosperity, I think it might be worth starting with a quote from the Prime Minister, who said last year that the UK is an outward-looking nation. We need a shipbuilding industry and a Royal Navy that reflect the importance of the seas to our security and prosperity. And he also added that I am convinced that by working together, we will see a renaissance in this industry, which is so much part of our island story. So let's bring shipbuilding home. So what do we need to do to fully realize this opportunity? Well, if you're here as part of the enterprise, then you'll have a vital part to play to both define and deliver this vision. Importantly, I would include international colleagues in this group, because this vision is one of a maritime enterprise that epitomizes global Britain, where international partnerships will underpin our mutual success. Of course, this is also in the context of the critical requirement to re-energize the economy post-COVID. It represents a real opportunity to truly build back better. So how are we going to seize this moment? So just a few numbers. The MOD will spend approximately 20 billion on shipbuilding and support over the next 10 years. And this supports 22,000 direct jobs across the union, and of course, thousands more indirectly. The integrated review set out that the maritime settlement will create a sustainable and committed shipbuilding pipeline and support enterprise, and providing industry with the confidence to invest in themselves. Vitally, this investment must deliver credible capability and clear value for money. This means that the new Build Back Better maritime enterprise must include investment in modern skills, new plants, and significant productivity enhancements. Secondly, digitization and the embodiment of Industry 4.0 into the maritime enterprise. Third, further and fuller delivery on export potential, and becoming a reliable export partner is at the core of this. We need to diversify the customer base and reduce the dependence of our shipbuilding industry on MOD. And finally, and critically, realize the ambition of the green agenda. So all of these are dependent on diversity of thought and innovation, which is in turn reliant on our diverse and interconnected workforce, and critically, a refreshed senior leadership cadre that understands and reflects this new reality and is energized for change. So underpinning this, the forthcoming National Shipbuilding Strategy refresh will be published soon, and this will set out the government's commitment to the UK's shipbuilding enterprise and the rich supply chain that supports it, with its purview now extending beyond the naval market into the commercial world, and especially with the green agenda. So this will provide a key lever to drive change, diversity, and new investment. For this to happen, we need to embrace the right vision. First, the Prime Minister has rightly highlighted the term working together. Our success is mutually dependent. This will not be the MOD doing it to industry or vice versa. What we can achieve if we work together as one team was demonstrated clearly when we went after and won the Type 26 export opportunity, a success that we're working to reinforce on other programs such as Type 31. But this doesn't mean that we're abandoning competition. So IISS set out a very clear new direction and advertised a more nuanced approach to competition and consideration of social value as part of the overall assessment. I mentioned earlier the need for significant improvements in productivity to deliver value to the UK taxpayer, but also to improve our chances of success in a highly competitive export market. Competition in our supply chain still has a role to play in incentivizing the right behaviors and delivery performance. We must grasp what the Prime Minister means by renaissance and bringing shipbuilding home. So let's be clear, this does mean hard-edged intent to refine, redefine today and change tomorrow based on a realistic and deliverable set of plans and a fundamental transformation of the industrial base. We must focus on reinforcing what we're good at, such as design, ships development, integration, watching, learning, adapting, and either being better than peer competitors or more quickly, and working with international partners to achieve competitive advantage, all of which is fundamental to demonstrating value for money. For me, this is captured in a vision focused on sustainable shipbuilding and support. In essence, it means making sure that this once in a generation opportunity leads not just to a set of quick wins, but to a legacy that will sustain both the Royal Navy and the industry upon which it relies for the long term in the context of the ambition for UK industry. And this ambition will see us become more competitive commercially, more innovative in offering new products and design into the market. So we must no longer perpetuate a reliance on pulses of naval orders to sustain the remnants of the industrial sector. While a sovereign industrial base has been preserved with consistently impressive skill set, this has not left it globally competitive or truly self-sufficient. That has to change if we're truly to build back better. So that concludes my opening remarks. Back to you, Fenella.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think what I found particularly interesting there was the approach to international partners and the fostering of UK defence exports. So I hope we can get back to that in Q&A
Sure.
and our competitiveness. So our next speaker is virtual. So Sarah Kenny, OBE Chief Executive of BMT. Keen to hear her industry perspective, but also from the point of view in light of the varied boards that Sarah is a member or indeed a chair of, not least Maritime UK. So really important to have that industry and trade angle of the debate, and also whether she thinks the UK government has got it right in its future maritime sector strategy. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for asking me to join the panel session today. So I think in common I expect with very many of you in the live and virtual audience today, I've spent much time reflecting on the maritime future over the past year. If I briefly go back to 2019, in what now are the heady days before the pandemic, for the UK commercial marine and maritime sector, the Maritime 2050 report off the back of the Maritime Growth Study set out for the first time a truly pan-industry, pan-government strategy for the UK. Since 2050 was published, it's fair to say that a great deal has happened and changed. The government have recently published, as Sir Simon's just highlighted, their Build Back Better strategy. And with the launch in the UK of the Integrated Review, the Defence, Security and Industrial Strategy, and the soon to be launched refreshed National Shipbuilding Strategy, we can see a significant renaissance in demand for marine and maritime skills, services, facilities and capabilities. And this plays directly into the UK's wealth of expertise in maritime people, training, design, systems supply, shipbuilding and sustainment, ship and port operation, logistics, finance, insurance, and wider service capabilities. Phew, and that's just a UK view. I think, though, that we have also now arrived at a major tipping point for the marine and maritime sector in the UK, as we see a combination of global and domestic environmental, technological, geopolitical and digital changes, which have all been accelerated greatly by the pandemic. Against this backdrop, and as we face the reality of economic recovery over the coming years, I suggest that we now need to start a new national conversation that is open and honest about how our enterprise must change to take the opportunities that presented to us. In my Maritime UK role, I believe that there really is a degree of anticipation and optimism within the enterprise about the future of the UK as a leading maritime nation. And there is no doubt in my own mind that there is a wealth of economic opportunity that exists for all of us if we are bold enough to collaborate in tackling the challenges that now arise before us. So I therefore offer three themes that could form the basis for some of these new conversations. The first of these is our scale of ambition. The second, our approach to innovation and investment. And thirdly, but certainly not finally, our real appetite for collective change and our ability to prepare for what may come. So let's start with the scale of ambition. I've already mentioned the various sector studies, strategies and route maps, such as Maritime 2050 and the shipbuilding strategy. We have articulated our ambitions for the whole of the UK maritime sector very clearly through these reports, all of which highlight the real potential for a UK marine and maritime sector already worth £46 billion per year and employing close to 1 million people, and a global maritime economy which is set to double in size by 2030, according to the OECD. The scale of the opportunity and the risk of not capitalising on it is therefore obvious. We hear about the global maritime presence and about a world leading maritime sector, but to defend our maritime assets and protect our interests. And as the cost of complex warships and other assets rises progressively against a fixed resource base, we are potentially faced with a diminishing number of ships with which to meet this global ambition. And of course, they cannot be everywhere. So will we have the responsiveness, the interchangeability, the agility and flexibility that can keep pace with the degree of change that we could be faced with over the coming decade? We and I greatly welcome the refresh shipbuilding strategy, but long experience indicates that it will constantly be subject to change as natural pressures, whether they're operational, political, budgetary, or performance, come to bear. I admire the clarity provided by the Secretary of State and his support for this maritime future through the process of the integrated review and the National Shipbuilding Strategy refresh. But I believe that it will rely, and perhaps it should rely, on real and collaborative actionable plans across industry and government with a real focus on genuine transformation that will endure. And of course, in amongst all of this, real care is needed. Will our ambition remain realistic as we begin the process of proper economic recovery? And we have to adapt and preferably anticipate the potential seismic shift in the nature of societal change that COVID has driven and is all around us every day, which is changing the way that we and our people look at the world, the workplace, and indeed our attitude towards the environment and sustainability. In our sector, and I know every sector says this, but I think it really applies to us, but we must consider the people issues very deeply, because if we don't, we simply will not be able to deliver the transformational change that's required, or to develop the new thinking for this post-pandemic, post-Brexit, sustainable and digital 21st century. I suggest that if we are to meet this aspiration, we need to rethink and have a new conversation about how we deliver the balance of forces we need, the industry and supply chains we need, and how to deliver a credible, inclusive and sustainable plan. The plan must be based on joint actions to address the need to transform our industrial landscape, really genuinely encourage entrepreneurship and develop the skills and talent for the new industrial and information age for the future. We do need a new narrative between government and industry, and we've got to get real here on both sides and regenerate our global position through both transformation and innovation. Which brings me on neatly to my next theme around innovation. We're living today with the consequences of, across the board, failing to properly invest as industry and as government in our marine and maritime sector. We have to do better. Innovation is hard. It needs talent, it needs cultural change, it needs collaboration, and it needs investment, which is a tricky gig in a low margin, high capex industry. However, the heyday of the UK maritime sector was built on innovation, and it will be inevitably the platform from which we rebuild. From my Maritime UK perspective, I see huge technological progress being made by our European neighbours, our American cousins, and in other regions such as Southeast Asia. I look to the UK and I still see too much fragmentation, too much protectionism, and too much risk aversion. And I suggest that the Royal Navy actually has an opportunity here to be more demanding from the industry, and also to work more collaboratively alongside the wider maritime and transport and other adjacent sectors to develop particularly into areas such as clean shipping, autonomy and digitisation. When we talk about innovation, we see a huge number of activities and funding streams, but we do lack a single authoritative and collective view across the sector on what is actually needed for our future and what are these initiatives delivering for us. Are they working at the pace required? And how much of it are we all bogging them down by process? We have to commit properly to innovation and properly invest in it. And alongside that, transform our procurement and commercial practices. And that requires change. And perhaps when John Dowdy has his opportunity to speak as an architect of smart procurement, I'd be interested in a view of how that looks today, given what Sir Simon has just said. We've made some real steps in the right direction, and the formation of MARI UK, which is an industry and academia working with the Department for Transport group, is a real progress. But it is just a small drop in a rather large ocean. As an industry, as I've said earlier, £46 billion a year, we are actually one of the largest in the UK. But when it comes to investment in innovation, we need far more help for the industry and from government if we're to build a truly world-leading, resilient and prosperous maritime sector. So finally then, coming on to that, have we as an enterprise got the appetite for these changes to prepare for a future that will be, by default, highly dynamic and will require agility? Will we work in cooperation with each other and be truly committed? And as leaders, if we see this need for change, are we actually encouraging our people to think differently, to be different in their outlook, to be prepared to challenge the status quo and to take on the risks that go with it? If we're not prepared to lead this change, then who is? Who is? I believe, summarising, that the opportunity is here for the UK to regain a brilliant position as a world-leading and prosperous maritime enterprise. But to do that, we have to accept that we've got to be realistic and credible, and we have to recognise that we have a very long business life cycle, and our ambition, investments and returns will be measured over very many years. Our collective endeavour, politically and industrially, must therefore endure and not become lost as other events take hold. We need to invest and collaborate to exploit innovation, and we as leaders need to step up and lead our enterprise through new conversations into this dynamic, if not turbulent, future. Thank you so much. That concludes my speech. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was a really compelling summary and overview of all the challenges facing the underlying market and how we are going to approach it. I think breaking it down to the scale of ambition, the approaches to innovation and the appetite for collaboration, after recognising that progress has already been made, but there are certain challenges that still need to be overcome is fascinating. I'm sure we'll come to in the Q&A as well. Our next speaker, as Sarah alluded to, was is John Dowdy, Senior Partner at McKinsey and Company. I've had the pleasure of seeing John speak at various other events, not least the launch of the Industrial Integrated Review at King's last year. His points of view are always really forward-thinking, and I look forward to hearing perhaps the geostrategic perspective and how some of those dynamics of global economics and maritime trade might impact the economic dimensions of maritime power. So over to you, John.
Well, thank you so much, Fenella, and thank you to IISS and the First Sea Lord for hosting this event and inviting me to speak. And Sarah, I'm very grateful for the shout out about the integrated review, acquisition, and smart procurement. But much as I like to speak about acquisition and the prosperity agenda, today what I want to do is give some of the geopolitical and economic underpinnings of what we're talking about today. And I'd like to do that in 4 pieces. Maybe we can get back to your question, Sarah, in the Q&A. I want to first illuminate 3 trends that are going on in terms of developments in world shipping lanes. And secondly, relate those back to the UK situation. I'll then try to derive some implications for sea power in the Royal Navy. And if I can get to it, I'm going to have to speak very quickly to do so. I'll offer a few thoughts for things that we might wish to discuss in today's session. So that's a lot to pack in. I'll go as fast as I can, and excuse me for slinging around facts and figures. So the trends. Now, as with many trends, the things that we see happening in the world today, many of them are not new. They're just accelerating. The developments in today's world are taking things that were already happening and pushing a decade of growth over the course of a year. And the first one is the shift in global value chains. Global value chains are undergoing some major structural shifts even before COVID, and perhaps not in a way that you might all have anticipated. After growing rapidly through 2007, global trade intensity has actually declined in almost all goods producing global value chains. And of course, that has major implications for maritime shipping because, as we all know, shipping carries 80% of global trade. What that means is that trade intensity, the share of output moving across the world's borders, has actually fallen from 28% in 2007 to 22% in 2017. Sorry, the figures are a bit dated. It takes us a while to catch up on these things. And this is especially pronounced in the most complex and highly traded goods. Very interesting when you talk about bringing shipbuilding back to the UK, that's a case in point, something that might have traveled across international boundaries now coming home. Of course, this doesn't signal that globalization is over, far from it. It reflects the development of China and other emerging economies, which are now consuming more of what they produce instead of sending it to all of us. So that's the first trend. The second one is that value chains are becoming more regional and less global. So this is a reversal of the earlier trend. Until recently, long-haul trade was becoming more and more prevalent as costs fell and global value chains expanded, for example, into China and other developing countries. However, the share of trade in goods between countries was declining from 51% in 2000 to 45% in 2012. And we've now seen a reversal of that. This interregional trade has now grown by about 3 percentage points since 2013. And it's interesting to see where this development is most noticeable. It's Asia and the EU28 are both trading much more amongst themselves. Trend number 3, the geography of demand is shifting. I think this is one you probably all are familiar with. Global demand, once heavily tilted towards advanced economies, is now shifting towards emerging markets, and especially with products like cars, building products, and machinery. So there are a few trends that are shaping what's going on, and at least the first two, I think, are likely to accelerate because of COVID, especially with this push for supply chain resilience, making local supply more attractive. Okay, so how does the UK fit into this picture? UK trade intensity is about median, and trade intensity is exports plus imports over GDP. The figure for the UK is 55%. That's similar to France at 59. Germany is much higher at 83, but you might be surprised to learn that the US is only 25. It's a very self-sufficient economy. And I think we've also seen the UK economy shifting from goods to services. That's a long-term trend. The UK is competitive in more knowledge-intensive sectors like pharma, and I'm delighted to say aerospace is one of those. Hence the higher share of intangibles in terms of total value. And I think this is going to be an important theme, which I'll return to. But enough on global economics. What does it all mean for sea power? So the first point I would make, and it's an important one, is that we need to distinguish between the economic rationale for having a global maritime presence and the geopolitical one. This is a difference between our interests and our values, and it's going to be important for us to distinguish between the two of those. And let me just illuminate that with a little story. A decade ago, NATO allies protected maritime trade flows that were vital to national interests. This was hydrocarbons moving from the Middle East to the West, and manufactured goods moving from the West to the rest. Today, that's completely changed. Hydrocarbons are increasingly flowing east, not west, as the US achieves energy independence, and manufactured goods are going in the other direction, from Asia to the world. The battleground today is over intangibles, over intellectual property. And yet, I don't think our naval presence has yet adjusted to the new reality, hence my choice today as my backdrop of the world's key maritime choke points. Put another way, none of this suggests that ships should not be deployed abroad, but it does suggest that they might not be in the places where we currently send them. We tend to talk about eternal strategic choke points, but perhaps the hierarchy of which of these is most significant is shifting. and it might well be seen in a different light by different regional actors. So a few thoughts for things I think we might want to discuss today. Number one, given the increasingly dispersed nature of trade, I think we're going to be forced to expand and reinforce alliances. Sally talked about the ever decreasing number of ships called upon to meet the nation's needs. And I think we're rapidly approaching, if we've not already arrived at the point where it's impossible to do it alone. I'd offer the thought that this might well take the form of coalitions of open societies, those that are committed to free trade and the protection of intellectual property. I group those two things together. You might wish to separate them, but I think they belong together. And to close, that puts a premium on participation, presence, and interoperability as we think about the UK's maritime forces for the future. Nothing about acquisition or the prosperity agenda, but we can talk about it later if you wish. That's it for me. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sean. That was just fascinating from the global shipping point of view, and the role that maritime power will have to play in considering how those value chains are more regional, more global, but also that trend that you're seeing where Asia and the EU 28 are becoming kind of a tighter market and trading with it amongst themselves. Speaking of Asia, our next speaker is our final speaker is Dr. Collin, Research Fellow at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies at the Nanyang Technical University in Singapore. He's here to offer the kind of Asia perspective with his background in naval affairs in the Indo-Pacific, but with a specific focus and his background in naval modernization in Southeast Asia, but also perhaps looking at China and how it takes a comprehensive approach to national power, including in the maritime domain, and how much of a challenge that represents. Over to you, Dr. Collin. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. A very good evening on my side. And allow me to thank the First Sea Lord and IISS for allowing me to share my view. I look at naval affairs and modernization, but today I'm going to put on the other cap, which is to look at the non-military aspect of the maritime affairs that I've been always looking at in the region, and hopefully to share some regional perspectives on this. Certainly my presentation is going to touch on China, but at the same time, I'm going to also touch on Asia in general. So allow me to first start off with a brief overview of Asia in this current post-pandemic context. And right now, what we are seeing is the increased interest in infrastructure development in the region. It's not just to do with inland or terrestrial infrastructure, but also the potential that could be raised when it comes to the development of marine infrastructure. And this is seen as one of the ways for Asia to recover from the pandemic. And in this sense, right now we are seeing here a very realistic situation in Asia. We see a non-uniform progress and process of marine economic development in the region. We see much more development in Northeast Asia, and that's largely due to the larger baseline capacities that are started off with, such as shipbuilding, for instance, as well as other infrastructure developmental aspects. Southeast Asia, by contrast, seems to be at a nascent stage. There are only a few countries that have been doing well in the marine economic sector. For example, Vietnam has a blooming shipbuilding industry. For example, Singapore has a booming offshore industry as well. But I think there is one major issue that I believe has been plaguing Asia in general, has been a lack of awareness about what basically sea power encompasses. I mean, during my interactions with regional maritime practitioners as well as policy makers, I tend to go in with this impression that their idea of sea power has always been about naval power. So there is always this conflation between sea power and naval power, when sea power ought to have been a sort of a composition of multiple aspects of maritime affairs. It's not just about naval power. It's also about the development of the marine economy, shipbuilding, ports and infrastructure, marine scientific research, as well as even, this course in maritime affairs on the regional and international stage. And even if you look at, for example, Indonesia's case, where back in 2014, there is the global maritime fulcrum vision that was being put forth that encompasses multiple pillars that leads to a very comprehensive understanding of sea power. We'll talk about, maritime awareness. We're talking about, marine economy development, marine infrastructure, maritime defense and security. But in terms of implementation, it has been found to be less than desired. So this is, perhaps not unique to just Indonesia. If you look at countries in Asia in general, you don't really see, a much more comprehensive development of this concept of sea power in that sense. But there is actually an anomaly, if I could put it, an anomaly, and that is China. That, right now in China, there has been a concerted effort in moving towards what they call the status of a maritime great power. And China has a very comprehensive view of what it wants to achieve as a maritime great power. It looks beyond just the protection of maritime sovereignty and rights that has been always largely reflected in its naval buildup, the modernization of Coast Guard, but it's also looking at marine economic development, for example. Huge investments in shipbuilding industry, as well as massive investments in marine scientific and research capabilities. And now we are seeing the Chinese oceanographic research vessels, for example, making forays into as far west, as the southwestern Indian Ocean, conducting deep seabed research, and even all the way up to the north, to Arctic, the Antarctic, to try to uncover the marine economic potential. But of course, there's always a security element to that. And I will see Asian countries largely turning to China as a source of post-pandemic growth and largely piggybacking on China's development of itself into a maritime great power. But I believe there are actually, besides the economic drivers of the quest towards building marine economic development and cooperation with China, I think there are some persistent issues on hand. I think one is the broader strategic concerns about China's long-term intention. There is also concerns about the fiscal sustainability of cooperation with China, especially in areas like ports and infrastructure development. There is a broader issue and concern with the global supply chain resilience. And beyond China, Japan and South Korea are still seen as alternative sources of collaboration when it comes to marine economic development, especially for Southeast Asian countries that are small and weaker by comparison. Finally, I would like to share my observation and some policy recommendation when it comes to the role of the UK and Europe at large. I think the one major contribution when it comes to the development of marine economic sectors in Asia, looking beyond China, I think it will be in the area of capacity building in shipbuilding, for example, technological transfer. I think more importantly would be development of human resources in Asia. And of course, when it comes to the building of coastal fishery community resilience, I believe looking beyond the government, I think there is a lot of potential when it comes to the non-governmental organizations in the UK and Europe that will actually, find it easier to work with the local governments and the local communities in the region. And of course, perhaps equally, but also perhaps not more important, is capacity building in marine governance. I think this is something which I strongly believe that Asia still lacks in general, is the crafting of policies, marine policies, ocean policies that will promote sustainable marine governance. I think this is one area I believe the UK and Europe could contribute massively, especially when it comes to focusing on post-pandemic blue growth pertaining to marine economic development in Asia. So with that, I end my brief overview, and I look forward to the discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the issue where there's that lack of awareness and the difference between sea power and naval power, and how big countries in Asia are sort of gradually getting to that point where it's more economic drivers rather than strategic, is really interesting. And it'll be interesting to see which countries start to take that approach as well. I think India is looking at harnessing its blue economy. So yeah, we'll see how countries develop, or whether it will still be that strategic driver and focus. I also enjoyed the point about how the UK and Europe can interact in the region and develop skills and sort of human resources and development and technology transfer. So thank you, Dr. Collin. I will now, we do have quite a few questions on the internet. We do have one in the room, so I'll hand over now to Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Yeah, on the topic of shipbuilding, I agree with the panel that the future is potentially bright. That the building blocks are there. However, I'd perhaps suggest that in the past the building blocks have always been there, but it's rather been indecisiveness, U-turns, delays that have actually caused caused the sort of the stoppage to this renaissance of shipbuilding in the country. So particularly in the era of COVID, when perhaps in a couple of years' time it might be very tempting to suddenly decide that we don't need Type 32 frigates, for example, what kind of safeguards are in place to make sure that indecisiveness, delays and whatnot doesn't continue on? Thank you.
Yeah, so if Simon, you want to take that first, and then maybe Sarah on the line as well. Thank you.
And one that was addressed for us actually by Sir John Parker when he came in to look at the national shipbuilding strategy as it was in embryonic form then, and to make some comments. And for me, the key part of this is moving away from a stop-start type of approach. And the work that's gone on over the last 3 to 4 years, I think has been fundamental to driving that consistent pipeline through our shipyards. If you've got an investment proposition that stretches out 5 to 10 years, then industry can invest. Sarah talked about skills. It's not just about facilities and capability in our shipyards. That's important, but absolutely critical to that is building skills. And you can only build a workforce with the skills that we require to deliver the sort of efficiencies that we're expecting in the future with a consistent pipeline. So I think the building blocks are very much in place there. All of that work that was done, if you like, the conscience that John Parker provided us back in those days, that the first Sea Lord in the room here today has taken forward with a passion, is all about creating that pipeline and creating the confidence for both the Royal Navy and indeed our industrial partners to invest in that future. And I think the integrated review and the command plan that came out of that provided a funding line and a clear strategy in terms of delivering that plan.
Thank you, Simon. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you. Yeah, my first comment actually is just to bear in mind in response to the question that between 40 and 60% of most warship acquisitions actually are based on systems and subsystems supply. And I certainly don't think the UK has languished or stood still in that area. In fact, in many respects, we are and remain world renowned in terms of combat systems, mission systems, autonomy, electronic systems. So I just want to sort of make it clear that actually a large portion of what when we talk about shipbuilding, we oftentimes, I think in our minds at least, have a view of a yard and building hulls, and shipbuilding of course is far more comprehensive than that. So I just wanted to make that point first, because that side of the sector certainly has not stood still or been subject to some of the disruption that the person raising the question had put. And why is that? Well, I guess it in many respects, if listening to Sir Simon, it doesn't rely on such a significant infrastructure investment. It's not such a long-term investment. It's a much clearer path, because you can achieve, in terms of product sales globally, you can achieve scale, which means that the return on investment is clearer, and the path to be competitive and sustainably competitive is much clearer. So one of the things I very much welcome about the refreshed shipbuilding strategy is the fact that it properly now embraces system and subsystem supply as a crucial component of shipbuilding, and that it's not all about building ships in yards. But coming on to the yards point, I think this is where a far greater collective endeavour is required. So shipyards that purely are based on military shipbuilding over many years, in spite of long-term TOBAs, actually haven't been as competitive or as productive as they perhaps could have been. And I think the shipbuilding strategy has acted as a good catalyst for change there, because it's allowed the benchmarking of those yards with competitors. There's a lot of arguments around what's a level playing field and what does that look like in terms of government support. But nevertheless, I think the modernisation of our yards has occurred in the last few years. I think there's an ambition and an appetite for more, and rightly so. And I think that positioning us in terms of competitiveness is increasingly important. And alongside that, actually opening us up, recognising that there is an international market, and that we should be reaching out, and that our shipbuilding strategy shouldn't just be about building our national ships. It should actually be about what inwards investment we can attract by positioning ourselves for global business. And I think the export success of Type 26 is phenomenal. Actually, it's a real signal of what we can achieve in the global marketplace, and I very much welcome actually more of that. So I don't have a negative view of this. Actually, I think it's all to play for, but we do have to remember that long-term point. Investment in infrastructure is significant, and you have to bear in mind that it's a long-term commitment. You don't just do it today and expect it to still be there tomorrow. And the point about skills is very well made, that this is an integrated enterprise. You can't just invest in a yard and expect the rest to happen. It has to be a long-term investment over a large number of what in defence terms you might call DLODs, but just thinking more broadly around systems, tools, processes, people, skills, training, all of those things that go together to contribute to a competitive, forward-leaning and productive industry.
Thank you. So I think that was a really comprehensive answer. There have been a few more questions about the sort of future shipbuilding strategy. I might just take a couple of those now. And if we first start with Ian Waddell at the Confederation of Shipbuilding and Engineering Unions. So shipbuilding is a complex business, and it's becoming ever more difficult as ships increasingly become systems of systems. The UK shipbuilding strategy needs a steady drumbeat of work to retain critical skills to carry out this complex work. So will the shipbuilding strategy refresh also include that steady drumbeat of work for UK yards, which we sort of covered a little bit, but and also their supply chains. So if we touch on supply chains as well. So without this, no privately owned company may take the risk of investing unless they can be sure of a return. Thank you.
So, Ian, yes, thanks for that point. I think in many ways you reinforce some of the points already made. Yes, the integrated review and the command plan was a signal, a strong signal in terms of continuity of shipbuilding. Type 26 batch 2 a Type 32 class next on the cab rank, so to speak. So fleet solid support, which has been in the melt for a while now. Yes, I would say that the future is there, that there is a consistent pipeline, that the funding sits behind it, and it's a real opportunity here for industry to figure out not only how they meet the challenges of building that capability for the Royal Navy, but in terms of that globally competitive export point that Sarah referenced earlier, there is that volume going in there. We should be buoyed by the confidence that we've taken from the Type 26 exports, and this one team together offers that opportunity to really be able to compete in a number of critical markets globally.
Thank you, Sir Simon. And Sarah, I don't know if you want to touch on the supply chain element as well.
I think just to build on what I said earlier, that the success of system and subsystem supply, you could argue, is partly because we've had a consistent drumbeat, to Simon's point, of activity through the UK, but also because you can achieve economy of scale quite easily by naturally exporting, and equipment systems, subsystem suppliers have naturally always done that, because they view their product markets very different to infrastructure-based shipbuilding markets. Perhaps actually going forward they shouldn't be quite so much, but it's much easier to invest in development of a new product or service when you know for a fact that you're going to sell thousands of them, and that you'll have a product life cycle and receive income from supportability, and then you can incrementally carry on innovating and investing in product development. So I think we've always had a buoyant sector in that respect, and perhaps I suppose a reflection is, as we deliver on our ambition for the refreshed shipbuilding strategy, are we properly learning the lessons from those underpinning differences between the way that we export and develop business in system and subsystem supply versus hull form supply? So make sure that we cross-reference and learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question in the room. Hugo Desis, please go ahead.
Thank you, Fenella. We've seen that a growing number of countries, when presented with opportunities to procure or import assets from, let's say, European countries, are also looking for opportunities for technology transfer. Do we expect European countries that are interested in exporting products, but often deprived of significant domestic markets to call their own, to be able to both secure key industrial and technological skills at home and relevant export markets, or is that a Gordian knot that the shipbuilding industry will be expected to cut in the future?
Yeah.
Technology transfer is usually at the core of most export negotiations. And I'm not sure it's possible to generalize. Each case has its own merits, but I suppose you've got to look at Type 26 as an exemplar here, a complex warship, arguably the best in class globally. But our Australian partners and our Canadian partners have chosen to invest in that. In terms of technology transfer, there are certain systems, certain sovereign systems that the Australians wish to install on the ships. And back to Sarah's profound point, that the fighting power of these vessels is about the systems, the sensors, and the weapon systems. So the Australians will build their own mark of Type 26. They will have their own radar and weapon systems. But in terms of technology transfer, they'll be building the ships in their own yards. The design will be fundamentally supplied by BAE Systems, but I think that's just a great example of how an export country can buy into a program that is essentially a UK program, but also involve their own sovereign capabilities and associated industries in pulling together the capability and building the prosperity around their own indigenous industries, much as we're looking to do in the UK, and was a fundamental part of the DCIS publication.
I wonder if Dr. Collin, do you have any points from the sort of Asian perspective of how that might be received, or what countries in the region are looking for in terms of their as they import capabilities or develop their own maritime base? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I mean, the thing is, I think right now, most of the countries in Southeast Asia in particular are actually first looking at not just building the ships. I think they need, capacity rather rapidly. So I think, as far as naval capabilities or Coast Guard capabilities are concerned, and then right now I'm wearing my Naval Forces cap when I'm talking about this, I think the generation of those capabilities is more important. But of course, there's always the desire to have, those arrangements like offsets and other tech transfers to allow them to build up some form of self-sufficiency in at least, building the hulls, and then, systems integration in particular is certainly one area that regional countries are looking at. But when it comes to Northeast Asia, I don't see too much of that challenge being faced, because I mean, basically, if you look at Northeast Asia, in Japan, South Korea, even China, I think there is a very respectable level of self-sufficiency when it comes to building systems, building ships, whole warships, whole platforms on the whole. So we are actually largely looking at Southeast Asia as that potential market when it comes to this sort of capacity building as well as technological transfer. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a raised hand. If we could go to the name's just Greg Kennedy, I think it was.
Thank you. Question is for Sarah. And I take the point, and I'm very glad she's brought up this point about the subsystems and the components. And I think stand fast, the Type 26 experience, which also I think the panel would have to admit was an unexpected case of its success. So therefore not as conscious as the other programs. The UK past and the history of being able to deliver on time, on budget, and to spec, Sea Astute, Type 45, etc. Not great. So I think this thing that you mentioned, Sarah, about kind of the realities of what you can and can't do should be seen in a greater and wider perspective. And I think it should actually be seen even in a larger national perspective, in the sense of, HS2, Heathrow, runway. I mean, there is a litany of big projects being hard to handle. And why is it that you can collaborate to build aircraft, but you can't collaborate to build ships in the same way, when you have an obvious market and an affinity with the United States Navy to be able to create this kind of synergy in the same way as the aerospace does? So there are a number of these kinds of stovepipes, and as you say, I think politically sensitive no-go zones that they have to come down if you're actually going to truly get innovation and transformation. And to be honest, I've listened to the panels here today, and I don't believe I've actually really heard innovation and transformation. This is not the Jackie Fisher moment when he wipes out the entire Royal Navy by the introduction of an entirely new system. So this is not that. And it's not that because of the inability to change these critical structural elements. And I guess my question really for Sarah is that, you know, if I was investing in the future, my hard-earned dollars on this, what kind of return would I actually be expecting to get in the next 10 to 15 years?
Sarah, over to you.
Wow. Thanks, Greg. What a question. Well, I think there were a few questions or points in there, actually. So there's a thing about UK productivity or credibility to deliver. I think there was a thing in there about not interoperability, but cross-decking different or better sharing across countries. So that collaboration piece internationally, and there was, I think, a piece around UK collaboration too, and the sort of final point about leadership. So I'll just unpack a few of them, just conscious of time, but very happy to have another conversation with you because that's really thought-provoking. Just in terms of UK collaboration with other navies in particular, I think actually having been involved very many years ago when I still wore a lab coat as a defence scientist, the number of international collaboration projects we worked on RDT&E was considerable, and I know that remains the case today. And of course, we don't talk about all of them, but I'm very well aware of some of the particularly important in terms of strategic capability collaborations that go on, particularly in the submarine sector. And I would regard those as very successful. And, you know, I was personally involved in Anglo-Australian collaborations as well, and Anglo-Canadian collaborations, and much does get exchanged and shared. And I think that's all to the good, in actual fact. And it plays into the earlier question that Sir Simon answered around, what is it, when you're looking at international collaboration, you've got to have something of value, but you also have to be suitably respectful of the sovereignty and the desire for domestic capability that exists in the countries who you're collaborating with. And the export of Type 26 is a case in point where, as Sir Simon said, you know, combat system, for example, radar, for example, where, you know, if there is a desire to establish and develop sovereign capability in another territory, they won't take that technology on. So they're always just, in my speech, I talked about the need to get real. I think there is a need to get real about which capabilities domestically you really not just are famous for, but want to be famous for, and that you believe and can demonstrate you can credibly deliver. And that gives you export strength, and it also, to your other point, gives you delivery credibility, and that is important. You cited some pretty high profile projects in the UK, HS2 being one of them, so few, that's not a maritime project. But in terms of credibility, if you try to be famous for everything, you by and large end up not being, and then start to run into issues with your credibility. Actually, one of the things that I think is really important about Maritime 2050 for the whole sector in the UK, but also the refresh that I'm expecting on the shipbuilding strategy, is a far greater clarity around what it is we're going to be famous for and how fast we're going to go and how we're going to get there. So that's the kind of credibility piece. The final piece is leadership and collaboration. So how are we going to get there? To your point, unfortunately, I haven't been able to join the whole thing today. So your reflection on whether or not you've heard innovation and transformation and leadership come across, you've certainly heard it from my speech, because frankly, if I think there's one thing that will transform our sector, it's leadership. Actually, because with clear focus leadership and a real desire to transform, everything else just happens, and all of the other barriers do get swept away. And I don't mean that in a naive way. I think that's genuinely the case. And you would have all heard the old adage of, you know, the definition of insanity is doing everything the same but expecting a different outcome. We have to do things differently. There is no alternative. So if we apply the same thinking to a new problem, we'll end up with the old solution. It's as simple as that. And so what I really want, and the reason for my speech being so clear around far, far greater, more honest, more direct and more collaborative dialogue within industry and between industry, government, academia and other stakeholders is that it is time to get real and have proper dialogue, not wait until a strategy report comes out and then have a response and then go backwards, forwards, backwards, forwards. We haven't got time, frankly, for any of that. It's far better to just say, look, this is our strategy, work with us on it. These are the strategic investments that we believe need to be made. Can we do it together? Where do we need to get partners? Where really aren't we very strong and we need to learn from others? Where do we need to develop skills from scratch or capabilities from scratch? We can't avoid the fact that if I pick up 3 themes that have come about, in my view, since COVID, sustainability, digitization, and societal change are the 3 things that are going to profoundly impact how successful we are going forwards across the UK, but especially for us here today as a UK maritime and marine sector and nation. We've just got to get with it and accept that those themes are there and work with them. But to do that needs much, much greater collaborative, honest dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. I know Sir Simon has some comments on that as well, but I'd also then like to bring in John Dowdy after that, in light of the study that he's conducted into the efficiency and effectiveness of 33 defence forces around the world. So he may have some insights as to any of the key findings that came out of that. But Sir Simon, please go ahead.
Thanks very much. And Greg, thanks for a great set of questions, dare I call them. But the one that sort of hung out there for me was the comment about time and essentially time overruns. And speaking as somebody who's worked in the air sector for 35 years, I'm delighted that you hold the air sector up as a paragon of virtue in that respect. I have a few slightly different memories, but the point I really wanted to bring out here, I'm not aware that we're any worse in terms of cost overruns than any of our time and cost overruns. Probably rather better actually at cost, but certainly we need to get better at time. I'm not aware that we're really any worse than any of our near peer NATO allies in that, and I reference that from being the UK's National Armament Director and the conversations and discussions that I have with my colleagues. But what I wanted to point to is one of the fundamental causes of time overruns, and that's complex systems integration. And that is the one thing that when you look, never mind maritime, but air and increasingly in land now, as we get more digital combat systems into ground vehicles, the real challenge is that complex systems integration. It takes skilled people, it takes investment, and it takes time. And if you look across the world at reasons for cost overruns, look at some of the issues that are raised with the F-35 program, the biggest defense program in the world. It's that complex systems integration, software, multi-domain integration. Those are the challenges. That's where we can, as a UK Limited, build those skills. And we need to be better at sharing those skills cross-sector.
John, over to you.
Thanks, Fenella. Greg, that was interesting. I liked your question. Why can you collaborate to build aircraft, but you can't collaborate to build ships? I would reply by saying that collaboration is a two-edged sword. It gives you economies of scale, but it creates substantial complexities and delays. And we just heard Simon Bolam say that complex system integration was the single largest cause of delay. I think complex political system integration is also a huge cause of delay. And if you haven't heard anything truly innovative and transformative today, I think we need to talk about artificial intelligence and autonomy. To foreshadow Damien Rees's question, we saw First Sea Lord launching of the Mayflower autonomous vessel in Plymouth. How do these cost-effective, long-range, long-endurance vessels change the economic landscape of shipbuilding support and operations? And I think it's a a theme and a topic that's well worth spending some time on. Since you raised the air analogy, and it was echoed by the Chief of Defense Material, I'll give you an air figure in return from the Chief of the Air Staff, who said that he envisions in future we'll have 2 piloted aircraft flying with 10 loyal wingmen and 100 smaller drones, Mosquito. So that you've got a fundamental transformation of the arithmetic on the battlefield. And I went and tried to estimate this a number of years ago and came up with an even more drastic figure about the relationship. And the good news is, once you take the need to keep people alive out of an armored fighting vehicle, a ship, a submarine, or an aircraft, you suddenly find that you can do it much, much cheaper and lighter, smaller, more maneuverable, and more effective on the battlefield. So I actually think this is a real opportunity for the UK, not to collaborate extensively with other nations, but to use the skills and capabilities that already exist in the country to design, build, and field autonomous systems, which could then be exported across the world. So there's my attempt at innovation and transformation.
Thanks very much. I think we have time for one more question. And thanks for covering the autonomous question there as well. I did want to cover it as well, but I was worried there wouldn't be time. But so the final question, Chris Trelawney, Chief of Maritime Development at the International Maritime Organization, has asked, how does the UK intend to use the Royal Navy's immense soft power capacity to lead global maritime development agenda through helping developing countries to develop their own maritime governance structures and maritime law enforcement capabilities, sort of supporting their food security? Simon, over to you again. And if or okay, yeah, if you could take that question, First Sea Lord, that would be great. Thank you.
It might be easier for me to take it. So I just think that's a bit unfair on Simon. So so I think in lots of, I don't know if the soft power of the Navy when it deploys is necessarily as sort of discreet as the way that the questioner made it. So I think all of the by virtue of deploying, by virtue of working with other navies, by virtue of signaling what it is that we're about, that contributes to the soft power piece. But the other piece that I think links more directly with the question is that we have a whole series of information sharing arrangements that are tailored for different parts of the world. That then allows us to then have some training and capacity arrangements. That then allows us to link with the UK Hydrographic Office and to use those relationships to build with other countries. So that's probably my best answer. Whilst I've got the mic, I wouldn't mind sort of responding back to Greg Kennedy's question, because I think it's transformation is a really ugly word, and it's a bit of a managerial word, and I wouldn't claim that we're doing anything that is in the realms of Jackie Fisher, but I'd say that's quite a high bar to apply to everything. My pitch for transformation is that we are becoming a carrier strike navy again. At the same time, we're on a path to introducing a new deterrent submarine, the Dreadnought. At the same time that we're shifting our Royal Marines into a new future commando force. At the same time as strengthening in the North Atlantic, and we're increasing our persistence presence around the world and trying to embrace this technology and innovation. And then there's a touch of the sort of, what have the Romans ever done for us? When you add in that our tonnage is increasing by 50% between 2015 and 2030, that we're building 7 or 8 classes of new ships and submarines over the next 10 years. And that hasn't been seen for about 50 years. And we're doing all of that with 20% fewer people than when we were last that size. That's why it feels like a transformation program. Then you throw in that our headquarters have been reduced by 35%, and we've reduced the number of admirals by 35%. Then again, I think other people would say, well, this feels like a bit of a shift. And then just to get to some tactical points, the the F-35B is a massive shift as a 5th generation aircraft. And it's awkward because some of the really special things are in a sensitive space, but we're doing that at the same time in partnership with the Royal Air Force and international partners. But if I also just take the aircraft carrier, that 65,000 ton design is probably one of the best designs in the world. It allowed us to allow British industry to build an aircraft carrier for just over £3 billion that has about a quarter of the ship's company of an American aircraft carrier and delivers about 60 to 70% of the offensive air power. That is a staggering achievement. If you then come down to what we're doing with the Future Commando Force, we're taking a company of people that normally would work on a battlefield sort of distance of 3 to 5 kilometers. And instead, we're shaping them into teams of either 8 or 10 teams of 12 people. And they're operating over 100 kilometers, with each of those members of the team having drones, having each one of them having a sniper capability, each one of them having a communications capability, so that if you're the company commander, your life has dramatically changed because your template is not 3 to 5 kilometers. It's how you control this team of teams over about 100 kilometers. That is a staggering shift. And so that's why I think it feels a bit different. And at the same time, we're trying to shift the whole of UK defence by embracing those other domains of space and cyber, and just modernising defence to be far more digitally adept. So I definitely don't think that meets the Jackie Fisher super high bar, but I think it feels to us that this is trying to shift UK armed forces and trying to embrace innovation in a stronger way than we have done in the past.
Thank you, First Lord. I think that brings us over time, but thank you for responding to my final question. And I didn't quite get to all the questions on the Zoom, so apologies for that. I think they were wide-ranging, varied, and it made for a very interesting discussion. Huge thanks to each of our panelists, Sir Simon Botham, not least, and Sarah Kenny, John Dowdy, and Dr. Collin virtually. So I look forward to the opportunity to work with you all more in the future, and thanks to everybody in the room as well. We have a 15-minute break and we'll reconvene at 16:45 UK time. Thank you.